So when I started going to the journey in high school, a new thing for me was seeing the centrality of the gospel of grace in everything that the church did. It was really eye-opening. Seeing it in the preaching, in the worship, in the communion, in the way community worked, and how that played out in intentional outreach in the city of St. Louis really helped me better understand how the motivation for living out the Christian life and for doing church in general all flows from this gospel, that Jesus has died for us and given us everything we need for life and godliness.
I remember in specific one sermon series that really impacted me a few years ago, and it was a sermon series called Extraordinary. And this sermon series was about how God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. And the one thing that you keep seeing in these stories is these people's courage and kind of the leap of faith that they had to take when they stepped into God's calling for their life.
I learned how to commit to the body of Christ really in sickness and in health. We experienced God's faithfulness through the members of his body as when our daughter died, and we saw people who didn't really know exactly the right way to serve and love us, but they consistently showed up and they were willing to go into the messy, uncomfortable place and say, we're here and we love you, just show us what to do. And it was just a beautiful example of God's faithfulness to use us right where we are when we say, yes, I'm willing, I don't know how and I don't know what the next steps are, but I'm going to keep showing up and I'm not going to quit because it's not perfect or because I don't know all the answers.
So I went to the journey for a couple years towards the end of high school, and then I went away to college at Mizzou, and the Lord really showed me how I could be intentional with my classmates, with people I met in the dorms, with people I was just becoming friends with on campus. You know, even though the college campus is an amazing mission field, there's so much death there. There's so much just running to sin, running away from the Lord. But since I kind of embraced around my sophomore year this idea that I needed to run after these people and intentionally seek them out, I've seen dozens of them come into a faith community and join in the small groups in the church that I was going to as a student here on campus. I've seen a number of them who were, went to church when they were growing up, but maybe didn't take faith seriously, really commit their lives to the Lord and say, I want to follow Jesus. And even some people who were skeptics. I have 5 or 6 friends who are skeptics and said, I'm not even a Christian, who've given their life to the Lord. And in the past couple of years, it's been really incredible to see that life transformation that happens when you really embrace God's calling to live out the gospel intentionally.
It's been about a year now since I have been back on mission in Nicaragua, and it's been amazing to see what's happened over the past year as I've kind of stepped into what I believe is God's calling for my life and kind of allowed him to guide my steps and allowed him to work through the specific gifts and talents that he's given me. And I have gotten the opportunity to see so many incredible things over the past year, to interact with so many incredible people here in Nicaragua, and to start an organization that I believe is having a big impact on the youth here in Nicaragua.
So the journey really gave us the confidence to be able to be part of his body in New York City and be willing to leave our precious journey and move into a new season where we could join his work here. And the journey gave us a lot of confidence that wherever there are believers, just doing it, just committed and willing, God will accomplish and establish his kingdom.
I love that I have a pulpit with a cup holder on it. I think it's exactly the way Jesus preached and taught back in the day. A little cup holder on the side, I'm sure. We want to start the sermon with that little video because we just want to show an example of just everyday average people who grew up spiritually here at the Journey, and you saw it was just sort of self-filmed. Everyday average people growing up spiritually at the Journey who have experienced the love of Jesus and then learned how to express that love wherever they go, learn how to express it in whatever situation or circumstance or city in which they find themselves. And so as we're looking at this sermon series called Next, we're talking about how do I take a next step? How do I take a next step on my spiritual journey? How do I take a next step with my relationship with Christ? What's next for our church? And I want to be clear, because when we say next, we're not talking about, oh, this is like the next big thing for the journey. When we say next, we're talking about reclaiming the original vision of the journey. Looking back at where have we been on track? Where have we gotten off track? Where do we need to get back on track? So we say next, we're not talking about, oh, we're starting some next big initiative. We're saying, no, we're reclaiming the first original vision of the journey. And so every week we're looking again at our mission statement, our vision statement as a church, with this little triangle graphic that we created, and saying, we want all of us, anybody who's connected to the journey, part of our church, to say, I know what the church is about, and I know what I'm supposed to be about. So at the journey, we say, we're a diverse spiritual community that exists to love God, connect people, and transform the world. Love God, connect people, transform the world. And of course, that's easy to memorize, and it sounds, it's biblical, it sounds great, but what does that really mean? Because those are big concepts, right? And so that's what we're spending this fall doing. What does it mean to love God? And so we have a little more detailed triangle graphic. So what does it really mean to love God? To love God means to train as his disciples. And we saw last week that doesn't start with what you achieve, but what you receive. You receive the grace of Jesus. And today we talk about growing up and being trained as a real disciple of Christ. What does it really mean to engage people, connect people? It means to engage broken people in broken places with the renewing, redemptive gospel of Jesus Christ. What does it mean to transform the world? How can I transform the world? It simply means you trust God to transform the world in and through his gospel, in and through you, his people, as you become sent out into wherever you work, live, and play. Just like the average, ordinary, everyday people we just saw on that video. And so this sermon this series is all about really what we want to see is the heart of Jesus more and more becoming the heart of the journey. The heart of Jesus more and more becoming the heart of the journey. And to do that, we have to grow. We have to grow up in our faith. Like, if you want anything in life to go well, you know that you need to grow, right? If I want to excel in my studies, in my work, in my career, then I need to grow. I need to get better. If you want to be a better husband, father, mother, brother, sister, roommate, friend, daughter, son, you need to grow. If you want to have a healthy emotional life, you want to have thriving relationships, you need to grow. And Jesus is calling us to that. That's just simply true across the board, because we know, like, if you have, what Jesus says here, if you look at verse 37, he says, look, there's a harvest out there. The harvest is plentiful, but laborers are few. There's a great mission. There's a great thing I want to send you out to, but there's not enough laborers. There's not enough people growing up. If you have kids, you know that before they leave your house for good, you want them to grow up and be able to do something and live in some kind of independent fashion before you send them out into the harvest, right? Like, that's what you hope for. And Jesus is saying, man, before I send you out, before you transform the world, you need to learn to love God. You need to learn to train as a disciple. You've got to grow up, because, and this is true across the board, you stop growing today, you stop impacting tomorrow. If you stop growing today, you stop impacting tomorrow. If you stop growing, being renewed in Christ, then your influence, your ability to teach, your ability to impact will diminish over time. And Jesus shows us here that in order to grow up, you need leadership, and you need Jesus leadership, because what he says is great growth comes with great leadership. Look how he connects these things in verse 36. He's teaching and preaching all these villages, healing all these diseases. It says, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. He says their problem, they can't grow because they've been, all the authority figures in their life, the spiritual authority, their parental authority, their political authorities, whatever, they've abandoned them. They're harassed and helpless because they're like sheep without a shepherd. A lot of us know what that's like, to be neglected, abandoned, or abused by people who are supposed to care for us or lead us. And when Jesus sees that, he has a heart of love, a heart of compassion. And he says they're like sheep without a shepherd. They need a leader. See, in the ancient world, not just Christianity and Judaism, but across the board in ancient civilization and religion, the iconic symbol of a great leader was a shepherd. It was a shepherd. And Jesus is the one saying, I came to be the great shepherd. Nobody else wants these people, but I will lead them. I will be their shepherd. Great growth comes with great leadership. That's true in your life, in your family, in your business, in your workplace, in the church. And it's the leadership of Jesus. You say, I never really thought of Jesus as a great leader before. Let me put it to you this way. Jesus was a man, an unknown man, an uneducated person, a person of questionable parentage and lineage, a person with no title, no money, no authority, no recognition, who took a bunch of other people like that, a ragtag band that no one else really wanted, and he transformed them into a multi-billion, with a B, number of followers across all classes, races, ethnicities, and nationalities that has lasted for multiple millennia. Do you know anyone else who's done that? I think you can argue Jesus is one of the greatest leaders of all time. And he says, I want us to see how his leadership changes us and grows us up in him. Now, how does that all happen? Where do we start? Most of us started with Christianity or religion or Jesus the same way these people did. Look at verse 35. It says, Jesus went through all the cities and villages, teaching, proclaiming the gospel, healing every disease and affliction. See, it starts with crowds, right? Verse 36, when he saw the crowds. You start on the fringe. You start in the crowd. You get connected to Christianity or Jesus because you're curious, maybe. You have like he says, he's teaching and preaching, right? People coming out, who is this guy? Who's claiming to be the Lord of the universe, the Messiah of Israel? I'd like to see this show, right? You're just curious. See, some of you are engaged, or you're here today, or you became engaged originally because you just had really good questions. You had questions about faith and life, and what are these weird Christian claims, and who's Jesus really? And you need to make sense of the world. You want to make sense of life, and so you came curiously. Some people come in the crowds because they have needs, right? It says there that Jesus was healing every disease and every affliction. People were coming going, my mind is broken, my body is broken. Jesus, help me. See, a lot of us got connected to Christianity. We started in the crowds, right? Because we got a tragic news. We were ministered to by someone who was a Christian. We might have gotten a medical diagnosis that was horrible. Maybe a relationship broke up that devastated us. Maybe a relationship started. Like a lot of people have become Christian at the journey because you were into someone who was at the journey. Like you wanted to date him or her, and so you had to come, you're part of the crowd. And that's where it begins. And so Jesus is saying, listen, people come and start in various places, right? You start your growth process. You start your journey from curiosity, from felt need. You start as sort of a consumer, but something drives you forward. See, a lot of people, like I said, come curious, skeptical, agnostic, doubting, whatever, asking good questions. I love to hang out with people who are asking hard questions, agnostics, skeptics, because it's just a fun conversation. And a lot of times, one of the questions that you have, some of you are here this morning thinking this, is, if God's really real, if this whole Christianity thing is true, why doesn't God just show up and demonstrate himself, like just show up in power, show up in some kind of a miracle that would prove and leave no room for doubt that he's real? Verse 35 says, thousands of people came and saw him healing every disease and affliction, and they went back about their business like nothing had happened. The religious leaders of the day saw Jesus raise a man out of a grave who'd been dead for 4 days, and they plotted to kill him. See, right now, if like the building started shaking and light came through the windows and there was like the audible voice of God, journey. That's probably not what his voice sounds like, but some of you would be like, I believe that was a genuine experience. But what would a lot of you do? You would accuse me of making stuff up, right? Like, he's fooling us. He's tricking us. He had, like, the sound technology doing all this kind of stuff. See, there's always a way to doubt something. There's always a way to explain something away. There's always a way to explain the evidence and the data away if you want to. Frederick Buechner was a writer. He was asked, have you ever had an experience with God that left no room for doubt about his reality? And I thought his answer was tremendous. He said, if God gave me an experience with him that left no room for doubt, then it would leave no room for me. Because I'm a human. We're humans. We are doubting people. Doubt is not the enemy of your faith. So some people come just curious and you're asking questions. And that's a great place to start. You're part of the crowds. You come with felt needs. And as a church, we have always wanted to be a church that served the broken, that served the unchurched and the de-churched, people who weren't used to church or who had been wounded in the church. And if you come to Jesus, whether you come with curiosity, you come with felt needs, or whatever thing you come to, you know what you experience with Jesus? Verse 36, he had compassion. The first thing you'll see, the first thing you'll experience if you meet the real Jesus is his compassion, his love for you, his unmitigated mercy, because he's a God of love. And what he's saying is, some of us are part of the crowds because we're curious. We got some needs. We're trying to figure this thing out, and that's great. But some of us are still part of the crowds. We're still just sort of a consumer of religious goods and services, and we've been a Christian for years. And Jesus is saying, I want you to grow up. I want to call you out of the crowd and into this life of mission, into this life that I am calling you to. To do that, we got to be able to see beyond ourselves, beyond just what we need, and we got to be able to see the world in a different way. That's what a great leader does. A great leader shows you the same world in a new way. A great leader shows you the same world in a new way. A good leader looks and can see the problems in the world, but a great leader sees the solutions. See, this is like entrepreneurs. We have a lot of entrepreneurs in our church, and I love just hearing how you all think and respond, because what you do is you look at stuff that most of us are like, that's terrible, that's broken, that's frustrating. You're like, I see a business opportunity. I see something to be, jobs to be created, services to be rendered. I have we have some friends. They're older, but they semi-retired. They move up to this little town in Wisconsin, and they're so excited. It's a little rural town and great community and near the lake and all that kind of stuff. And he's always been an entrepreneur. And they got there. It's a small rural town, so they only had one little company that provided internet access. And it was terrible. Customer service was terrible. It was slow. It was spotty. Disconnected all the time. Always got kicked off. And so everybody else is like, this is the problem. These people are failing. People are unsubscribing, leaving. You know what he said? There's an opportunity here. He saw it differently than everyone else. He bought the company, and then he got rid of everybody that didn't want to serve people. He brought in customer service, people that did want to serve people. He tripled the the broadband, whatever the technology. He tripled all the good stuff, made it accessible, made it work, and then he tripled the number of subscribers, and now people have jobs, people are being served, because he was able to see the world in a different way. And that's exactly what Jesus does. Look again at verse 36. When he saw the crowds. See, he's challenging what we see when we see the crowds. He's challenging what we see when we see people. What does Jesus see when he sees the world? What does Jesus see when he sees someone? You know what they were seeing? They were seeing this mass of humanity, this mass of needy, broken people. They were seeing drain on society, the dregs of society, people that never stop asking for things. They were seeing a bunch of entitlement babies, a bunch of whiny millennials. You know what Jesus saw? A great leader shows you the same world in a new way. When Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And he said, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. When they saw the crowd, they saw a mass of humanity. Jesus saw sheep that needed a shepherd. When they saw people unworthy, the drains of society, and Jesus saw a harvest. He saw an opportunity. He saw potential. Where they saw disappointment and frustration and failure, Jesus saw potential and redemption and the ability to take that and make it into a great harvest. And that's exactly what he did. That's what a great leader is. Listen, what do you see when you see the world? What do you see when you go into a store? Do you just see customer service people that do well or don't do well? You go to a restaurant, wait staff that does well, helps you, doesn't. You get on the road, you just see drivers that either annoy you because they're too slow or they're crazy because they're zipping by you. When you look out at your neighborhood, do you just see neighbors, apartment friends that are they're too loud, they annoy you, they mess with your yard, whatever it is? Like, what do you see when you see the world? And Jesus says, what I see is a harvest. I see an opportunity. I see a chance to see the world through new eyes. The next step every one of us needs to take is to see through the eyes of Jesus, to see the world, to see the people around you through the eyes of Jesus. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them. He did not say, oh, those are the messed up people. Those are the people that are causing the problems in society. If those people didn't exist, if that party didn't exist, if that candidate wasn't around, then we could do something. When he looked at the world, when he saw people that we would normally be frustrated with, when we would see condemnation, he saw sheep that needed a shepherd. He saw harvest. He saw potential. He saw an opportunity for redemption for people that the world had written off. That's the beauty of what Jesus does. And so he's asking you and me to look through his lens, to see people, see the world through his eyes, the eyes of compassion. That's what he's saying. All right, how do you take the next step in that? Jesus tells us it's not that difficult. See, because he says the problem is not the lack of harvest. Like we look out and Christians are the world doesn't like us and our institutions and politics is not going our way, which is certainly true. We complain about that. And well, if I share the gospel, people aren't going to respect me and listen to me. Jesus says the problem is not in the abundance of the harvest, it's in the laborers. He says the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. The people willing to be grown up and sent out into the harvest because people are messy and difficult. That's what he says. The harvest is plentiful. There's a great opportunity. You can start verse 38. Jesus tells us pretty simply, therefore pray earnestly to the Lord of harvest. Therefore pray earnestly to the Lord of harvest to send out. The next step you can take is just pray for your neighbor, pray for your church, pray for your friends, pray for your city, pray for your community. Pray that God would raise up laborers for his harvest. See, where do I start? You start small, but just start now. Obedience cannot wait. Start small, but start now. Don't wait for obedience. And so start with a simple prayer. Start with a word of encouragement. Before you leave today, speak to someone and give them a word of encouragement. You can start right there, a small little next step. Before you leave today, find some way that you can just offer one small act of service to someone that is here. Start small, but start now. Like, if you want to learn how to bench press 350 pounds and your current max is 150, you don't throw 350 on the thing and pick it up, right? Because one, you're not going to get off the rack. Two, if you did, you're just going to crack your sternum open. If you want to get there, you got to start now, but you got to start small. You go with 150, 160, 170, right? Listen, get in the Word, get in the Bible. But if you've never read through the Bible before, I'm like, I'm going to read the Bible cover to cover in 3 weeks. No, you're not. You're not going to make it. Just 4 verses a day. Say, I'm going to commit to reading 4 verses a day because I want to grow. I want to come out of the crowd and move into what Jesus is calling me to, and that's what he does. See, look at. We're going to look just briefly into sort of chapters 10 and 11 here. Chapter 10, verse 1, he says, and Jesus called to him his 12 disciples. He looked at the crowds, he had compassion, and then he called out 12 laborers, 12 disciples, 12 people who would follow him. See, a good leader tells you what to do, but a great leader shows you. A good leader tells you what to do, but a great leader shows you. Jesus had told them what to do. Pray earnestly to raise up laborers, train up disciples that will go out into the harvest, right? And then what does he do? If you look over at Luke chapter 6, it says that the day before Jesus, because this is the calling of the 12 disciples, the day before Jesus did this, he stayed up all night praying earnestly to the Father. I can't think of the last time I stayed up all night praying when it wasn't just because I couldn't sleep or whatever. Jesus prays all night earnestly to send out laborers. And then what does he do? He goes and calls out and raises up laborers. He calls them from the crowd to himself. See, if you've been a Christian for a while and you're still just part of the consumer, you're still just part of the crowd, you need to hear Jesus calling you out of that. It's okay to start in the crowd, but you don't stay in the crowd. It's okay to start as a consumer, but you don't stay a consumer. Jesus is calling us out. He's showing us how to do it. You have to move from a hearer of the word to a follower of Jesus. And that's what Jesus, as the great leader, is showing us really how to do. What does that look like? That means unconditional obedience. That means you don't get to go and go, well, Jesus, I like this, what you say, but I don't like this anymore. It means unconditional obedience, no matter what the cost, no matter what my friends will say. Unconditional obedience. It means intentionality. If you were going to be someone's disciple in the ancient world, there was an intentional life. Listen, you're like, I don't like intentionality. I like to be, spontaneous. Good, I do too. But listen, have you ever seen anyone accomplish anything great without intentionality? And the other alternative, by the way, is just a life of just reacting to what other people do. If you don't have intentionality, you're just living a life of reaction to what other people are doing. So why not be intentional about what you're called to do, about what God wants you to be? You ever seen anybody do anything great without intentionality? Did Michael Phelps, the greatest Olympian of all time, did he just show up at the Olympics, like, I'm going to try that butterfly. I've never tried it before, but butterfly stroke up here, probably be pretty good at it. No, he had an intentional regimen. He had intentional disciplines. He built his life, his schedule, his finances, his resources around becoming the greatest swimmer of all time. What are you doing to be intentional about growing up in Christ? I'm not talking about legalism. I'm talking about a set of rules. I'm talking about what are you doing intentionally to grow in the grace and knowledge of Jesus? Is your life being built around that? It does not happen overnight. Like no growth does, right? You don't put your kids to bed and wake up 6 inches taller. They grow slowly. You don't plant some seeds and then Jack and the Beanstalk happens. It goes over time. And so a disciple is not built in a day, but you are built daily. If you want to be a woman of God or a man of God, it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen in a day, but it does happen daily. And then you look back 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 10 years ago, and like, I don't even recognize who that person is because God in his grace has just transformed me. Where I was once part of the crowd, now I'm a follower of Christ, and I want to be going out into this harvest that Jesus talks about. That's what he is doing here. He's saying, let's don't be just talkers. Listen, we've been at times, we're all good at talking. He said, not just a talker, but a doer. Let's don't just talk about discipleship. Let's get disciple. Let's be part of this. How do you take the next step in that if you're in that spot? Jesus says here, those who are just sort of flailing around are sheep without a shepherd. They haven't submitted themselves to shepherding. You haven't submitted yourself to any godly leaders in your life. Do you have a godly man or woman or some men or women who are sort of leading you, directing you, who are able to mentor you, able to train you, able to disciple you so that you'll be able to disciple others? Do you have that? See, do you have a shepherd in that way? Like I just have a real passion for our church that we will become a church that will literally be like a factory of shepherd producers. Like that because when I look at, when Jesus looks out at our church, I don't want him to say, man, they're harassed and helpless. I want him to say, they are shepherded, they are loved, they are cared for, they are growing, they are being fed. That's what I want him to say. And to do that, that takes not just one or two people, that takes all of us growing up into our faith. I'm trying to personally do this right now. I realize, sort of always have, but especially in the last year, realized all these different deficits in my own life. And I'm working really hard to grow as a person, my own character. I'm working really hard to grow as a preacher and especially as a leader. And so I've gone out and gotten a counselor, a coach, and a cohort. I had a counselor to help me work through like my issues, my heart, all that kind of stuff. I got a coach going, yeah, this isn't right, or he's better than that. But he's helping me see how things function and how my dysfunction impacts and hurts or helps people, and it stinks sometimes. Like it's not fun to hear how you have failed, but if you want to grow, it's amazing. I heard this great quote by this band Coldplay. If you guys know, some of you know Coldplay, and they said they had a lot of success, and they put out another album, and it was just like people just ripped it to shreds. Like people they respected just ripped it to shreds. And they said to Chris Martin, the lead singer, like, what do you do with that? Like when your baby, your artwork gets ripped to shreds. And he said, well, you have two choices. Like you can go and cry about it, and you can go and like moan, and you can blame the people that are criticizing you. You can blame the reviewers, or you can get better, or you can grow up. And he said, we chose to grow up. And I want to choose to grow up. I want to choose to get better. And that's what God's calling us to do in our walk with him, our faith with him. And Jesus, again, as the great leader, shows us. See, he doesn't just inspire us. A good leader will sell you, but a great leader sends you. A good leader can sell you on a product, but a great leader actually sends you and empowers you, reproduces you. Think about, Jesus says, okay, there's this harvest, right? This worldwide, eternally impactful. I want you to have eternal significance in my kingdom. I want you to go out in this harvest and be a laborer in the harvest. Okay, Jesus, sell me on this deal. Let's look at Jesus' salesmanship. Just a couple quick verses in chapter 10. Flip over to chapter 10. Chapter 10, verse 16. Behold, I'm sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Wolves eat sheep. Great sales job. Verse 18. And you'll be dragged before governors and kings for my sake to bear witness for me. Verse 21, brother will deliver brother to death, and children will rise against parents. You're going to have family drama. There's going to be animosity or disconnection between family over the sake of Christ. Verse 22, and you'll be hated for my name's sake. Verse 28, do not fear those who can kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. In other words, the worst thing they can do is kill you. The worst that can happen is you die. Great sales job, Jesus. Where do I sign up? See, Jesus is not out to get you to sign some contract and then show you the fine print later. Jesus tells you the truth up front. He says, yes, there is going to be greater cost, greater sacrifice, greater risk than you could ever even hope to prepare for, but there will be greater reward than you could ever dare to imagine. Because you will know me, you will follow me. The God of joy, the God of reward. He doesn't try to sell us, he sends us. I imagine, Jesus, he wouldn't have been a good salesman because he would never close the deal, like he grew up as a carpenter's son, and I like to imagine him growing up if Joseph had been not a carpenter but a used car salesman, I think the family would have starved because, Joseph would have been like, hey, this is the car for you and your family, this thing's on point, you need to buy. And Jesus would be in the background like, timing belt. Because he's always telling us the truth. See, a good leader can sell you on anything, but a great leader sends you. And that's exactly what Jesus does. Verse 2, he calls them apostles. That means sent ones. Verse 5, he says, these 12 Jesus sent out. Verse 16, behold, I am sending you out. He's saying to you right now that as you grow up, I want to send you out. I have a mission for you. I have a harvest for you. Do you see it? Are you pursuing it? Are you willing to engage the sacrifice and the risk that it will cause? See, a good leader inspires us, but a great leader reproduces himself in us. And that's what Jesus does. He says, I want laborers who raise up laborers who raise up laborers. I want to create disciples who make disciples who make disciples. And that's the kind of culture over time we want to create at our church, that all of us are able to grow up, to move from the crowd to the call to the commissioned and sent out. We want to raise up a place where all of us are able to both be discipled and disciple others, to raise up some spiritual children. See, Jesus did not just live and die, preach and teach. He raised up people, followers, who would reproduce Jesus in the world after he was gone. And you go, I don't know if I'm ready for that. I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I'm equipped for that. You probably aren't. Nobody is. Verse 42, though, look at this. This is encouraging. Verse 42. Whoever gives one of these little ones even a cup of cold water because he is a disciple, truly I say to you, he will by no means lose his reward. Are you able to give someone a cup of water who is thirsty in the name of Jesus? Then you can take the next step. Then you can start. See, start small, but start now. That's what he's saying. Because the truth is, you can kind of sit around and go, oh, I'm going to wait till this happens. Or I got a lot more education, a lot more training. Those are all great things, but you grow as you go. That's the way, we believe by hearing, but we typically grow by doing. Like I told you before, my dad owns a body shop. He taught me how to work on cars. He could have sat me down at a table or in a classroom and taught me for 82 hours about cars, but until he let me get my hands on a car and figure out how things worked or didn't work, I wasn't going to grow. I wasn't going to learn. And so Jesus is operating under this. He gives them some brief instructions in verses 5 to 15, and then he sends them out. Go ahead, try it. Because raising up disciples is sort of like raising up kids, right? You know how that goes? A kid is never going to learn how to pour milk unless they're allowed to spill some on the table, unless you're allowed to make some mistakes. And you know what Jesus says? You can fail freely with me. I have compassion on you. I want to see you grow. And to grow, you have to go. You have to actually try something, risk something, walk across the street, walk across the cubicle, whatever it is. You have to actually risk something because we grow by doing. That's how discipleship's a lot like raising kids. It goes slow, it takes time, and you have to make a lot of mistakes. Our daughter is 4.5, and he's talking about his daughter. He's going to start crying. Maybe I will, but I'll try not to. She's 4.5. She has some developmental issues and needs, and right now, she's learning to wash her hair. And she's a girl. I don't understand how this works because she has a lot of hair, and it takes a long time to wash it and get it all. But every night, she washes her own hair. You know what? It takes forever, and she rarely gets it all. So what should I do with that? Oh, you're taking too long. Let me do it. Scrub, 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 scrub. That's what my parents did to me. I'm just kidding. No, I need to let her. See, we tell our kids, it is not healthy for us to do anything for you that you can do for yourself. And then there are times we get frustrated and impatient and we do it for them anyway, but that's the goal, right? And see, Jesus is saying, listen, you've got to be sent out. You've got to just try something. You just risk something and see what happens. Make some mistakes, spill some milk, and see what Jesus does. You'll make some mistakes, you'll spill some milk, but Jesus washes it clean with his grace. He washes it fresh with his love. And believe me, if you take this on, if you go, okay, I want to be a laborer, I want to go out in the harvest. Some of you have done that. A lot of you are doing that. You're working for the sake of Christ and his glory in your community, in your apartment building, in your family, and in this church. You know what will happen? You're going to get tired. You're going to get weary. There's going to be opposition. You're going to be out sheep amongst wolves. All the things that Jesus said will happen. And what do we do with that? And this is where Christianity becomes distinctly different than any other religion, than any other form of discipleship. Because it's not Jesus going, go harder, burn out for me, do more, risk more, sacrifice more. When the burdens come, when the burdens are too heavy, a good leader can name the burden, but a great leader carries the burdens. Jesus is the great carrier of our burdens. Jesus put the weight of the world on his shoulders so that you don't have to carry it on your shoulders. So if you look at the very end of chapter 11, remember Jesus said, pray for laborers, raise up laborers. Chapter 11, verse 28, come to me, all you who, what? Labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. My yoke is easy, and my burden is light. So he's saying, Jesus can say his yoke is easy because he's saying, I've done the hard work so that you and I could do the easy work. His burden is light because he's done the heavy lifting so that we could do the light lifting. He carried the burdens of your sin to the cross. And wherever you find yourself, whatever stage of growth you find yourself in, I'm hurting, I'm struggling, I'm sick, I'm failing, I'm sinning, I'm rebelling, come to Jesus. He can carry you. I've had a couple times this year where I was just weary, spent. And my wife said to me on those couple of occasions, you're not going into work today because you're not capable of helping anyone. You need Jesus to carry you. Take this Bible, this journal, and this blanket and go sit out in the grass and just talk to Jesus. Because Jesus is saying, come to me. All you who are heavy laden, all you who are burdened, and I will give you rest. Because I will give you my grace. And because of him, And through him, we can move out into the world in freedom. The weight of the world is not on my shoulders. The weight of the church is not on our shoulders, because Jesus put it on his shoulders. And so you can trust him. You can move out and risk and sacrifice because he's already paid the greatest risk and the greatest sacrifice. And then we would have people from the journey, thousands of people from other churches moving out as laborers into the harvest, feeding the world with the love and mercy and grace of Christ. Let's pray that God would grow us up in that faith. Jesus, let us not think that we have achieved something in your sight. Rather, we have received it from your grace. And so, Lord, I pray that you would carry us. I pray that whether we are new Christians, non-Christians, mature Christians, that we would be returning to you for rest, returning to you with the burden of our souls, returning to you to carry us in your grace and carry us out into the world for the sake of your harvest, Lord, that we would see many, many women and men coming to faith in you, many, many women and men being baptized in your name, many, many women and men growing up as great godly shepherds to love and care for the hurting and the broken. Lord, when we see the world, when we see the people around us, may we see them through your eyes, the eyes of compassion, the eyes of grace, the eyes of truth. Amen.